Welcome to this week's seminar. It's a great honor to have Yair Bar-Haim from Tel Aviv University come to us and talk about PTSD. Today he's going to talk about not so much the work that he's already done, but about the future, which I think is always the most exciting thing. So I feel extremely fortunate to have Yair here. He's been spending time with his wife, Linacre, for the last month, and he's got another month to go. And it's just been wonderful to be able to walk around and show him Oxford the way he showed me Tel Aviv in the past. And I think what has been really exciting about it is that it becomes clear that now, for the first time ever, I think PTSD becomes a tractable disease. He will tell you more about what it is that makes it a tractable disease, why it is that it's not just this kind of hodgepodge that we know from the DSM-5. This kind of, is it depression, is it anxiety, what is it really? And what you'll see here, and this is against the title, it's really a disorder of episodic memory. It's really a problem with memories that are being malformed. And I think, and I can in fact think of nobody better than Yair to give us a tour force of the kind of work that he's done, the kind of work that he will continue now that he's got his own center in Tel Aviv, which is, I think, one of the most exciting centers in the world because you have a very large population, sadly, of course, of people that potentially could be traumatized. But I think what is exciting about the way that you set the sensor up so that you will have scans of these people, you will have the brains of people even before they get the trauma. And so I think for this kind of data, with this kind of thinking, I think, and I would like to hope that we'll be able to help people with PTSD much, much better than we have in the past. And this is something that means a lot to me personally because I have been interested in PTSD for the longest time, and I try to convince the MOD as part of a foundation that I set up with McManus to actually help to fund this kind of work. Sadly, in this country, we believe that it's just a step up that is needed, and really that PTSD is not necessarily a large thing. But I think today, Yair will tell you about why it is a very important thing, to understand. So please, Yair, tell us.
Thanks, Morten, for having me and for all the long hours of walking around with me in Oxford. I will talk about PTSD today out of 3 lines of experience. One is as a researcher, as a neuroscientist, a clinical neuroscientist, doing what you all know, like the usual basic science work. The other is from the perspective of a clinical psychologist, where I directly treated, but also supervised hundreds of cases of PTSD treatment. And lastly, as a veteran of combat. So these are the 3 elements that inform my thinking about PTSD, which I have to warn you is not the traditional thing that you will see in the DSM. Okay? DSM is the manual. I think it's very important and good to have general guidelines, but I also have reservations, which I'm not going to bring up today. I will talk about more about episodic memory, but bear in mind that there are different ways to think about PTSD. Okay, so I'm just going to get started. Good. So PTSD is a disorder that requires exposure to a traumatic event in reality. So that event needs to be a serious threat to life or to the integrity of your own body or someone else in your vicinity. So it's a serious event. It could be a car accident. It could be combat when someone tries to kill you. It could be a natural disaster. It could be domestic violence, etc. Okay? But things that occur in reality. And then 3 main lines of symptoms: intrusion, memory intrusions of the trauma. We'll talk a lot about this. Hyperarousal, which are really all the usual anxiety symptoms. Fast heartbeat, a lot of vigilance to potential threats in the environment. And then avoidance. Avoidance of things that can remind you of the trauma And in a way, if you, and then DSM-5 also had these negative thoughts and cognitions about the world, which are mainly depressive symptoms. And together, there are 20 different symptoms in 4 categories that you need to satisfy a certain amount of symptoms in order to have them. And if you calculate it, there are 630,000 different ways to have PTSD according to DSM-5, which is a bit of a problem if you're trying to study it from a neuroscience perspective, like a mechanistic perspective. So it's a very heterogeneous type of a disorder, but these are the main symptoms. Some symptoms are left out. If you really wanted to be so inclusive, you know, people could have added aggression, domestic aggression and general aggression, addiction, alcoholism, etc. This is all out of the equation here. So it could have been even more complex if people really wanted to. But the way people think about it is there are the intrusions, we'll talk about them. Arousal, these intrusions cause arousal that leads to avoidance of anything that can create this very negative thing, and then negative cognitions and mood. And this circle goes on and on to create the disorder. And the interesting part is that most people, maybe I'll just bring this up, about 80% of people who experience a trauma will report these symptoms, at least some of them, immediately after the event. But then these abate with time, over days and sometimes weeks, and then really what happens is that PTSD is a disorder of failure to recover. Most people recover. 90% or 95% of people with severe traumas recover. Most people will experience a trauma during their lifetime, at least one trauma. But most people recover. Okay? So this failure to recover is a smaller kind of phenomenon, and it also depends on the severity of the trauma. So from car accidents, there's only about 2 to 3% PTSD eventually. From combat, it can go anywhere between 15 and 20% if combat is very severe. So at the height of Desert Storm operation for the American troops in Iraq and then later in Afghanistan, it was anywhere between 13 and 19%, which is a very large number. Very interestingly, the British troops there only have 4%. But you understand that it's not true, right? It's just how you measure it. Okay, so I will leave this for a second for you to absorb. I don't want to go into the different categories, but you can see that it is, you can start diagnosing PTSD after 1 month of symptoms. Usually clinicians would be inclined to give it a 3 months period before they start making all the diagnostic procedures or give the diagnosis, but then people who remain chronic remain with it for a very long time. Okay, so intrusion in DSM-5, there are 5 symptoms. The first 3 I think are very relevant. Recurrent involuntary intrusive memories that come in of the trauma, of course, that come in without request, okay? That's one. Then you have recurrent nightmares of the trauma. And finally, flashbacks, dissociative type of memory intrusion, where someone can either, the trauma is superimposed on reality, so to speak, like a film, like happening in the here and now. Professor Enke Ehlers from Oxford is one of the leading people, or the person who characterized these flashbacks several years ago. But this is something that people find very hard to imagine because we rarely, hardly ever confuse what comes through the senses and memories, right? It's something that hardly ever happens. When you look at the environment, you process the sensory information that comes in, but you don't confuse it with memories of your past. What happens in PTSD, in intrusions, sometimes they are confused. And I will speak to why I think this is happening. Then you have these two symptoms, B4 and B5, which frankly I don't understand why they are there, because read them briefly, they represent the human condition, right? There's nothing pathological about them. This is how we're feeling about negative things that we remember. We have physiological reactions, we have psychological, I don't understand why they have them there. So I ignore them, okay? And then in DSM there's another symptom that is memory related. But just briefly to say, we call this iTread. It's a paper that an opinion paper that we put out last year in the American Journal of Psychiatry, and Morten is part of this group that got together, and I'll show you some of the data that led us to think what we're thinking. But we stated that maybe a focus on these three symptoms would be a good idea if we wanted to infer underlying neurobiological mechanisms. So you don't deal with a very large phenomenology, very heterogeneous kind of basket of symptoms. You just deal with these, okay? And I wanted to have a very strong paper about it, saying that these are the most important ones, but we decided to have a toned down version of the manuscript. But the reason I say this also is that these are unique symptoms, and with an emphasis on the flashback intrusions. These don't happen in any other disorder. There are ruminations, depressive ruminations. In OCD, sometimes people get these ruminatory intrusions, but never this sensory confusion that we get with flashbacks. And this is the only unique symptom in PTSD. Okay? All the other 17 symptoms, they happen in anxiety disorders, they happen in depression, they happen in other psychopathologies. So I wanted to say maybe intrusion is at the heart of the disorder, and then everything else is coming out of it. Very important symptoms that need to be treated, but they may be secondary. But this needs proof. This is just me thinking here. Now, inability to remember important aspects of the traumatic event is another symptom that we see. It's with low frequency in PTSD, but it happens. And it also speaks to that memory system that has some problem with it, and we'll get to it now. Okay?
Okay.
So, I think it's hard for people to grasp, but it's something that really is, the feeling of it is extremely abnormal. And people react very badly to these kind of experiences. So you can imagine that it happens in a bar, but it can also happen.
So let's just get rid of that. Just click on that audio system.
Right. So these set of symptoms that, in my opinion, are memory-related symptoms, we wanted to see how they play about in very large samples. If you try to see how many people could be diagnosed with PTSD, out of the people diagnosed with PTSD, with only these three symptoms. Okay? So we have very large samples here from, you see treatment-seeking veterans in Israel, The stars, Army stars, the US very large sample run by the Army stars conglomerate, if you like. Many soldiers from traumatic civilians, from the States, from Australia. Now, what you see is that with these three symptoms, we can diagnose north of 95% of people with PTSD. Okay? Makes you wonder, right? And then not only that we can diagnose more than 95% of the people based only on these three symptoms, there are also about 10% who have these severe symptoms but do not comply with the DSM-5 diagnosis. So they have severe intrusions, flashbacks, and intrusive memories and nightmares, but they're not avoidant enough, or they're not hyper-aroused enough, or something that doesn't satisfy the criteria. And these people are not diagnosed and then sometimes go without treatment because they can't meet the required diagnosis. So this is interesting. We ran a study, we used the data from the Enigma PTSD project from 9 different sites, about 584 subjects. And we tried to differentiate, using machine learning, to try and differentiate between trauma-exposed individuals and people who are diagnosed with PTSD according to DSM-5, and then people who only have ITRED, these three symptoms, but do not qualify for PTSD. And you can see that the separation is nice here for PTSD versus trauma-exposed. Very similar separation for these three symptoms versus trauma-exposed, and no separation for between these three symptoms and the PTSD diagnosis. And you know, it's not perfect. It's only about 60%, 65% of the variance explained, so to speak. But still, this is what you get with this type of models, and you see the differentiation and lack of differentiation that you can get. And these are mainly frontal and limbic areas that run these multi-correlations. Okay, so I want to say a word about treatment, current treatments for PTSD. The main leading first-line treatment is exposure-based trauma-focused CBT. There are several protocols that are considered first line, prolonged exposure, CPT, one here from Oxford, from Professor Eller's group. Then there are medications, mainly antidepressants, considered second line, and many other treatments. TMS, psychodynamic, mindfulness. One of the big issues in the field is that these different treatments are not very different from each other in terms of efficacy. But there's more research on exposure-based treatments. What I want to tell you now is that these exposure-based treatments take their cue, if you like, from extinction learning theories, fear extinction. And then all this leads to focusing on the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex as the main protagonists. I'm going to suggest to you not that these parts are not involved with PTSD, they are clearly involved. There is a lot of information about it, but that this might not be the main issue and the main location to look. I want to show you a little bit of data here. So these data come from the Israeli Unit for Treatment of PTSD. It belongs to the IDF, treats veterans who come in with PTSD issues. Okay? So overall, the success rate is 40%. You see there the column in red. 40% of people achieve remission. Remission being defined as no longer meeting the diagnostic criteria of DSM-4 in this case, because this is data from 10 years of research prior to the DSM-5. Okay? But you can immediately see that the treatments are least effective for intrusion symptoms. Only about 15% of people leave the diagnostic criteria of intrusion after a full course of treatment. So the treatments for this particular problem are not very effective. And then you can see here, these are all the symptoms of DSM-4. You have two symptoms that are not affected by any treatment. One of them is flashbacks, D3, which actually gets a little worse, particularly with treatments that require a lot of rehearsal of the trauma and bringing back the trauma again. And then difficulties remembering aspects of the trauma don't move at all from these treatments. 72.8, so 73% of the patients who achieve remission no longer meet the diagnostic criteria. Out of these 40% that you see there, 73% still have full-blown symptoms in another category. So they don't really recuperate fully. And again, the lowest goes for the intrusion. Now, you see this complex problem with all these symptoms, okay? And I ask you about memory in PTSD, okay? Surely something is very wrong with the memory of the trauma. But people with PTSD don't have retrograde amnesia. They don't have problems remembering things from their past, things from their childhood, things that happened before the trauma. There's no retrograde amnesia. There's also no anterograde amnesia. People with PTSD usually don't have, I'm not saying there are no cases, but usually there are no problems forming new memories. So I think that the problem actually is very circumscribed and encapsulated. It's only the trauma memory, sometimes one or a series of related memories, that cause the trouble. Now, if you think about it this way, then maybe there is a good target for intervention, right? And also from the perspective of the patient. It's not necessarily all these problems that you have here that we need to deal with. Maybe we need to deal with one memory that went very wrong. Do you follow? Yeah. Okay. So, and you know, it's hard to think about this. I've been working with patients and I've done PTSD research for more than 20 years. It took me about 15 years to start thinking about the specifics. You know?
So I want to talk to you a little bit about episodic memory, because I think this is the core of the thing. So Tulvin basically told us that there are three elements. I added one, but three elements to episodic memory.
What happened? Where it happened? When it happened? And then there's the emotional tone that comes with the episode. And episodic memories, they're all the same in my mind. The traumatic memories are no different than other episodic memories. We all have very bad memories, right, of things. But they are normal. They are not intrusive, they're not flashbacks. They're normal bad memories. I'll get to that in a second. But first day in school is an episodic memory, okay? There was an episode there when one of your parents took you to school. Maybe you remember. Wedding, car accident, me and Morten having one of our excursions. These are all regular episodic memories, and they contain the following aspects. What happened, where it happened, In this case, it was, what's the name of this?
The perch.
The perch. And when it happened. Now, it doesn't have to be on the moment, right? But I remember it happened when I visited Oxford, and it was like a couple of weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago. Okay, and then the emotional tone. Could be very bad in this case, can be very good in that case, but they are all regular episodic memories, all of them. And there's a neural system that supports this. So I'll talk mainly about visual information, mainly because in PTSD, the majority of intrusions are visual. And people sometimes make the mistake confusing triggers and memories. Triggers can be many. They can be olfactory, they can be sound, they can be forms, shapes, internal conditions. Many, many different triggers for a memory. But the memory is just this one memory. Okay? That is triggered. It's usually the same one in PTSD. So the system, the visual system, so we have the ventral and dorsal streams that gather the visual information. See this in pink here. Feeding into an area near the hippocampus that specializes in transducing these very diverse signals from the cortex to what, where, and when components. And this happens, so the transduction of what happened mainly happens, I don't know if you can see this around here. Maybe I can, okay, so let's do it like this. So the entorhinal cortex, this is the yellow formation there, is transducing information about location. Okay, the green area tells you about what happened. And the yellow area and the orange area together with the hippocampus tells us about time. Time cells. There are time cells that fire in an organized manner throughout the event and mark its time both during the event and also its location in the general stream of events of our lives. Okay? And these areas basically take a very complex signal that comes from the entire cortex and transduces it into information that can be then bundled together into an event, an episode. Okay? And this happens inside the hippocampus. So, an interesting point is that until it goes into the hippocampus, these information streams about what, where, and when are pretty separate. They're not binded together. Only within the hippocampus, pretty much in CA1 and also some information between CA3 and CA1, we get these meshing together of what, where, when, and also the emotional component that comes from the amygdala that you see is not very far from the hippocampus itself as well, feeds into the hippocampus as well. So I'm going to skip this, but very generally, you have this system where information from the environment feeds into cortical sensory and association areas. There's transduction going on of what, where, and when, and then goes into the hippocampus to what, where, and when, what, where, when combinations that then feed back to the prefrontal cortex, to motor areas, and into behavior. Now here is my theory, and it's just a theory. Oh, I will track back a second. There are episodic memory theories of PTSD, clinical ones. One of the issues that people have pointed out, not me, other smart people, pointed out that these theories rely heavily on an assumption that is not supported by the neuroscience of memory, or it diverges from what we think about how memory works in the brain. And there is a general assumption in all these theories that there is a sensory memory, long-term sensory memory component that goes wrong in PTSD that then interacts with episodic memory to form these problems that we see, these flashbacks and these intrusive memories. What I want to suggest is that we don't need this system. The intrusive memories, they are memories, episodic memories that have gone bad, but in a very regular kind of way. So, normal memories, the ones that you have even from your worst bad memories, they are enmeshed together, the components. They come completely together. They are not separated from each other. In re-experiencing, in the memories that intrude and in a way that you relive them in the moment, the time and the place component are displaced from the content. And this is what allows you to feel information that comes from the environment as if, the content of the episodic memory, the what component, gets a feeling like is mixed up with what is being encoded from the senses. Now, therapy, in that case, would need to concentrate on these processes to try and bring it together, to try and bring it to be whole again. And many CBT type treatments do that, but not with intention. Okay? If you recount or rehearse your trauma in treatment in a safe environment, and you update some of the information that comes in a safe clinical environment, you could create a more integrated episodic memory of the trauma. The problem is, if you do it too vigorously, you lose the chance to actually integrate it. If you send your patient after an hour of treatment home, we know that the reconsolidation period lasts between 4 and 6 hours and sometimes requires sleep. If you open the trauma in treatment, and then you send the patient up, and the patient sits in the parking lot in their car or back home and get another flashback, it ruins everything you did in treatment. If you send your patient with an audio tape, like in prolonged exposure, for example, that's one of the leading treatments in the US for PTSD. If you send your patient with this audio to listen to every day at home alone, not in a clinical context, rehearsal leads to enhancement of memory. That we know from basic science of memory. So something is very wrong about the way it's being done. And when I say being done, it's also me. I have been doing this for years in terms of treatment. This is probably why many patients don't go the course of treatment and drop out, because they feel that symptoms are worsening. They can't take it. And this is why also I think our treatments are not very successful or partially successful. Okay. So I'll skip that. But I want to talk about the clinical implications, okay? So one very specific cognitive target for intervention, if you want to think that there's something into what I'm saying, okay? So one very specific target, the intruding trauma memory should be the target. It should be very focused and specific target for intervention. I propose to use standard neurocognitive theory and data to guide treatment development. And there's a very specific target for it, and it should be in the hippocampus, somewhere between A1 and A3. Okay? So, TMS, you know TMS? Transcranial magnetic stimulation, has been used to treat PTSD with moderate success. Again, small effect sizes like everything else. But maybe already several randomized controlled trials. Again, took their cue from trying to target the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is too deep in the brain to have direct stimulation via TMS. So you need to play billiards, right? You have to find an area that you think on the cortex, that you think that is connected to your target, and then try to stimulate it, right? So, taking their cue from extinction theories, the target was the amygdala, so they went for stimulation on the prefrontal cortex, with the hope to regulate this association between prefrontal cortex and amygdala activation and connectivity. Okay, again, limited success, very limited success. I think maybe we should target the hippocampus. So I'll show you what we did. We're just the very early days of this. Okay, so you will see our movement with very little data. Okay, from one patient. But I want to show you our thinking, because we are going, once we're done with 5 patients to make sure that it's safe, then we will move on to a randomized controlled trial. But we took the HCP data, the Human Connecting Project data, put a seed in CA1, and wanted to see where on the cortex would be the best place, the best connectivity, strongest connectivity. And turns out it's somewhere around the angular gyrus. All right? So we took 50 patients, participants from our own data in Tel Aviv, and locally scanned them and did seed-to-seed analysis. And again came up with a very similar area. You see this, right? And now we have a mask. The target you see in blue, you see the blue cross? This is the A1C. And our area of interest is the red part, very close to the cortex. Okay? To the outer side of the cortex. This is patient OA. Patient OA is a veteran with very severe intrusive memories and flashbacks. There's a main one, the main flashback, one event that we worked out very specifically, and then there are additional events, but he decided he wanted to work on the main one. Okay? The main event. So we scanned him, and we found, pinpointed, the area within the, around the parietal cortex, in the temporal parietal cortex, around the angular gyrus, that for him had the best connectivity with his A1. Okay? And then we brought him in for 5 sessions of TMS, guided, yes, fMRI guided TMS, to his location to target his A1 area while provoking the memory. So we will provoke the memory through audio recording, and once the memory is provoked, the window of reconsolidation opens, and we do 15 minutes of suppressive TMS, repetitive 1 Hz TMS. Okay? So this is how a whole brain of patient OA looks like pre-treatment. So the seed is in CA1, and these are the areas that you see that are connected to it, okay? You want to see after treatment? After 5 sessions, okay? So there's a dramatic change here in terms of how the brain looks like in relation to our targeted area. So you want to know about symptoms? Remember, just one patient. Okay. This is how the symptoms look like. From an average of about 8.5 symptoms, 8.5 intrusions a day. So you can imagine how the life of this patient looked like. It was cut to half after 1 session, after 1 week. Okay, 1 session. Then kept on going down and diminished seriously as sessions went on. Now, interestingly, if you look at the targeted memory, he was starting to get clear days without it after the treatment, and you see clear days, completely clear days towards the end of treatment. That he would report his intrusions on a diary, like a Qualtrics type, iPhone type diary, and completely clear days. At the end, after close to 15 years of this happening to him on the level of 5 or 8 times a day. And you can see also reduction in these flashbacks in the other memories, but not as good, not as complete as for the targeted memory. So I don't know if we should have continued or maybe moved to the other memories, but this is what we have for now. In terms of his symptoms, he went down below the clinical range by the end of treatment. And it might be interesting for you to see that the symptoms that went down are the intrusion symptoms. The rest of the symptoms remain similar. So for us, it's a big question what happens downstream, right? In 3 months' time, in 6 months' time. If my hypothesis is that this is the main thing that drives the disorder is correct, then we should expect some sort of a reduction in the other symptoms as well, right? But it didn't happen immediately at the end of treatment. So this is our first patient. We have another one now running. Anecdotal reporting, very similar. And he was a combat veteran, but the second patient is a civilian woman with a trauma, with a lot of intrusions, which is one of our inclusion criteria. Okay? Okay, so how much time left do I have? 5 minutes?
As much as you like.
5 minutes?
As much as you like.
Okay, so I could stop here, but I feel always, so this is new to me. It's like 5 years of work or 3 years of working on memory, because I think it's really important. But before that, we worked a lot on attention. Adva here did some studies, right? Good studies, and we've done quite a lot of studies on attention. And there's a question how attention relates to memory. Kandel even put it as one of the main issues that needs to be resolved. How attention is related to memory. Unfortunately, it's not clear. The general idea is that what you attend to gets prioritized, right? And then goes into encoding and consolidation. And then again, it can be opened when you bring it up, again, the memory, it reopens for its labile, so to speak, so you can update it, etc. But this is the idea, that attention can influence what is being encoded eventually, right? So in one study we used an attention bias measure to see a threat-related attention, really. You see a fixation cross, and then you get two faces. You see one of them is angry, and the other is neutral, and then you have a target, right? You have to just say if the arrow points left or right. It's a very simple task, and really you can calculate an attention bias from it. So it's the mean reaction time of neutral trials minus mean reaction time of threat trials. That will give you a number of the bias. So why? Because let's say that your attention was on the angry face, okay? It was drawn to the angry face there. And the target appeared in the same location, your response will be fast, right? But if it had appeared in the top location, you would have to disengage your attention and move, and it takes a few more, like milliseconds more. And this is how we can calculate this. So we did a large study with, in this case, it was like 1,300 young soldiers. So we measured once before they were recruited, once just before they were sent to combat missions, and 6 months after combat exposure. Okay? And we found this interesting thing. For the general population there, at baseline and at pre-deployment, you see very small bias, basically nothing. But when they are during deployment, they are very vigilant. You see on the third time point. Now we looked at the third time point and asked ourselves, okay, those who develop PTSD by the third time point, how do their attention look like? Okay, backwards. And it looks like this. They come in vigilant, but then before deployment, and even during deployment, they avoid threats on our tasks. Okay? They start avoiding threat. Now this is dangerous, right? If you walk in a combat theater and you're not paying attention, you could get shot, right? Bad things can happen to you. Now, we thought, and now this has been replicated by the US Army, very large samples, and also we replicated it again, and also the Australian Army replicated it. So there was a lot of interest in this. But we thought that this is a good place to intervene. Just before they are sent to combat, we can push their attention toward threat. So if you are not attending, then you will attend. And the thought behind it was, okay, you're not attending, it's a problem. We'll help you attend, because if you're not attending, then encoding of the trauma will be lacking. Something will be, could go wrong with the encoding. And the trauma could surprise you even more if you're not attending. So we trained them. We gave them the same task, only that now all the targets were in the threat location. We used words, we used faces, but always in the threat location. Okay, so we had this trial. In Israel, if you wait enough time, there's going to be some sort of a war. So we trained a large infantry brigade, about 900 soldiers. Half of them got trained, half of them treatment as usual, which means nothing. And we wait, okay? And then there was a mini war in the Gaza Strip. And all these 890 soldiers were sent into combat in Gaza for 50 days. And then 4 months later, we came back and we did clinical interviews with all the brigade, everyone, okay? And the results show you that in the control group, there was 7.8% PTSD 4 months later, and only 2.6% in the group we trained. That's a threefold odds ratio. But what's really important is the number needed to treat. You remember, most people recuperate from trauma. They don't need our training. They will be okay even without it, right? So NNT is the number you need to treat in order to save one person from having PTSD. So the best number is 1, right? Everyone you treat is saved. Our number for this study was 19.2. 19.2. So we have to train 19 soldiers in order to save 1. When we presented this to the Israeli Chief of Staff, he said immediately to implement to the entire combat maneuver of the IDF. And the Americans who paid for all this, they also tested it. And then the Australians. So this is like a big prevention program, to my taste, with limited evidence. Just one trial. Successful as it might be, as a scientist, I want to see more. So, but now they implement it for everyone. So, I have 3 children. The first one, we trained all his friends at my house, because we knew it was working. Now, for my second son, he already got it through the army. For my third son, who's not in the army yet, I hope that there will be peace before that, okay? But we convinced the IDF to not train one round of one brigade, which we are now following. De novo. We are doing this, but with the older version of the task, and then the second generation of training, which is eye tracking based. It's much more potent. But it's a big replication study, hundreds of soldiers. If it works this time, then I will believe more and be more convinced. But but that's the deal. And I think I will, if it will let me...
Click on the middle.
Yeah, so this is who paid for these studies. The NIH, the Department of Defense, and some other funding agencies. This is my lab. Advar, you still here now? No, that's the new lab. Okay, and thanks.
Fantastic. So much more data there. No, you stay here.
I stay here.
You stay here. So we'll take some questions maybe from the room first.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Apart from all I showed you, it's important for me to say that I know the best prevention of PTSD. You know what it is?
No more war.
Not going to wars,
Yes.
at least combat related. And anyone who's seen war should know that they should do anything they can do in their power not to go to war, to concede.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, now question.
So I think we'll take one hand. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, when you're showing the right before deployment and then deployment trends, that second one that you focused on, do you know why that dip happens? Baseline versus pre-deployment.
Yes.
Is that due to training or?
What happens to some people when they realize that they are going to combat, they start shutting down. And it happens it's a natural reaction, really, for some people. When you are supposed to get ready, be vigilant, pay attention, some people shut down. Now, there's a benefit for this in the short run, right? Because you feel less anxiety if you detach yourself. But then there's price to pay, right? If you do that, you're more prone to PTSD later. So what we're doing is we're trying to push them in the correct direction, but this also speaks to an important issue here, that attention deployment, adaptive attention deployment, really depends on context. Because if you are in anxiety disorders, for instance, in anxious children and adults, we see hypervigilance towards threat in a safe environment. And then we try to train them the other way. But in PTSD, in the context of combat-bound soldiers, this is where you want them attentive. That's the adaptive formation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I have two questions, if that's okay. The first question is, how do you figure out the right frequency at which to stimulate the parietal region? Because firstly, you're not directly stimulating the hippocampus, and secondly, I'm sure it's a specific pattern of activity within CA1 and CA3 that's encoding the binding of these memories. So yeah, how do you figure out the right parameters? This is my first question.
This is a very good question. Usually I say that very good questions are the questions I have answers to. But in this case, I don't have a good answer. We used this repetitive TMS for parameters because they were successful in other studies. It's not clear that this is the best way to go about it. And we had a huge, we actually had a huge debate within our research group. You realize this is a large research group that does this. You need to have TMS experts, you need to have MRI experts, you need to have clinicians on board. I was in the beginning, initially I was in the position that we should do excitatory TMS. Because I thought if you do excitatory TMS, you might be able to create better binding between the different components of the memory. But I was ruled out after a lot of debate and shouting because people were concerned that we might enhance the trauma memory. So we decided to go with this first. Now it's not the best. It's not clear that it's actually 5 times is necessary. Maybe you need 8 times, maybe you need 3 times. Maybe 1.2 hertz is better than 1 hertz. What will happen eventually, I think, is that if it works, I don't know what I did. I shouldn't have done it.
It's Windows.
Yeah.
Closest to update, yes.
Yes, don't update.
Okay.
Cancel. Okay.
Thank you, Bill Gates.
Yeah. What I'm concerned that will happen is that if it's successful, then this will become the standard. Because people, once something works for them, they try to stick with it. So when we started with these attention bias modification treatments, we said we need 8 sessions or something, once every 2 weeks. And then it became the standard, and no one really tested if this is the right way to do it. And
so of course what I'm hoping is to convince you here that we should make a whole brain model so that we can actually test these parameters. And of course this is one of the reasons why you're here. It's
But
because we
but
could
you are-
potentially do that, yes.
you're preaching to the choir. Yeah.
So no one is a sock and see, but I think there is a right and a wrong answer. And
Yeah.
I think it would be hugely interesting to do exactly this.
Absolutely. So we plan on having a randomized controlled trial next, after I'm convinced that there are no serious side effects, which will be, I guess, in about 3-4 months once we run through 5 patients. But then we'll have more data, right? So
Including, more imaging data. I think one of the great things about Yair's lab is that then you have lots of data on everybody that comes through your center and will be scanned.
yes, but not with this
No.
particular
No, but of course,
intervention. Yeah. But here we'll have 10 maybe.
Yeah.
Tens of people.
Was there a second?
Second question.
Yes. My second question was about the clip that you showed us
Yeah.
from that TV show. The thing that was most striking to me about that clip was the juxtaposition, the direct juxtaposition of the memory onto the person's present life. The walls in the bathroom crumbling.
Yeah.
Is that a realistic depiction of
Yeah.
the intrusive memory, where you actually?
So there are 2 levels, there are variant levels of dissociation during the intrusion. in some cases you realize that it's not really happening, so the dissociation is only moderate, but still you can actually see the trauma happening. And in some cases you get full dissociation. Some people dissociate completely. They don't realize that the environment, they relive the trauma and kind of snap out of it at one point or not. And sometimes doing dangerous things too while dissociating. I think it's very hard for someone to understand this if they didn't experience this person. But it feels very bad. It feels like something is really, really wrong. Now, many people have these flashbacks after trauma, remember, about 80% of people. But it resides quickly, so they don't really start dealing with the reality of being triggered unexpectedly as being part of your life, right? So, yeah.
Thank you.
That's the best clip I found to date.
Yeah, really amazing talk. I'm so excited. Lots of questions, but I'll pick one. So I'm just trying to understand the difference between your memory theory versus the normal idea that essentially there's too strong an emotional valence associated with the memory, and so every time it comes up, it just floods too much. Is it right to say that maybe one way of putting your theory is like, if the when component and the where component is dissociated from, is disintegrated from the emotional valence and what happened, then essentially your system thinks that this is happening now, here. And that upregulates a bigger threat, like, oh, it's not just a memory, like I have to defend myself right now.
Yeah.
Is that the idea, do you think? Or?
No, yes and no. So I think that what goes together is the what and emotion, they come together. Right? So they are very salient in these flashbacks. The content of the trauma plus the emotional reaction to it. And then what's displaced is time and place. I think when time is displaced, it's a milder type of dissociation. When where and when are displaced, you get this full dissociation. If they are both displaced. Now, you suggest an alternative. You're saying, the memory is reactivated, there's too much emotion, and then you think it's happening now. But I think we have terrible memories that bring out very sad emotions. We can tear to a bad memory, but it's a normal memory. It doesn't dissociate at all. You know that it's not happening now, you know that it's in the past. You place it where it belongs, in time and place. And I don't think that you're shocked by the emotions and that's why you think it's happening now. No. We can have very strong emotions with completely normal memories that don't dissociate. That's what happens to most people with the worst of experiences. They become normal. Bad memories. Right? To get this dissociation, something else happens. I think it's in the consolidation, during encoding, and then later during consolidation, something is not complete.
So what do you think makes a memory dissociable, as it were? What
Yeah.
do you think about, what is it about the trauma memory that makes it special?
So one option that many theories talk about is that there is a strong hormonal reaction during encoding window.
So sort of an interoceptive signal.
Interoceptive, but also chemical signals in the brain,
So
has
there's
been
a
mapped,
meta,
like
okay.
McEwen and other people, showing that acute stress causes both structural but also strong chemical reactions, hormonal reactions that can interfere with this memory binding process. But it's interesting because it's a very specific malfunction, right? It's just this one memory, or maybe two, that get this distortion. So it's just a small period of time that something didn't function. It didn't destroy the entire system. It doesn't require a different system at work than the usual system that usually works. It just didn't work. It's why the Toyota factory, once every 10,000 cars have a lemon, right? Something went wrong. I don't know why exactly. Well, we should eventually know why. But it has to do with the neurochemical, biochemical, electrical environment of the brain during the encoding of
But
the
do you
trauma.
think, so just to press you a bit on that, so a lot of these traumas are usually linked to a multisensory experience, right? I mean, a lot of people will have certain smells, certain auditory,
Yes.
I mean, so it's usually not enough to just have a visual experience, so that's why we're not becoming traumatized by watching a video. We need something more. There needs to be a sort of a presence in the now, yes?
So yeah, so let me say one thing about it from standard cognitive neuroscience theory of memory, okay, of episodic. So most people agree that the entire cortex is involved with memory, or even the entire brain, okay? So there is a general state of the brain during an episode, which is like what's happening now, right? You maybe will remember this talk. So this is an episode in your life, and the brain is in a certain state, a general state. Now it goes through all these processes that I described, right? Going through the senses, encoded, okay? Put into an encapsulated memory. Now, when we recall, we don't need the entire system to come back online. So even if one part of the network state is similar to the state of the brain during encoding, it can trigger the memory. Now some memories require very little to be recalled. Others would need a lot of triggering, right? Because it's not. And when we encode this specific memory, one, it's sometimes very similar to other memories, right? You've been here, I've been here last week in a talk. It's very similar. Similar environment, similar people, right? But still, the hippocampus knows to give it a distinct set of properties. So now, when it's triggered, okay, and the trigger for this talk could be 2 years from now, you will see something about PTSD and you'll remember me, or you'll remember the room, or something will invoke recall. My point is, when you will recall this, the what, where, when, and emotional tone, which is neutral, let's say here, will come together binded in one as single unit of this memory. Will not be dissociated. Something in trauma, because of the stress, because of the threat to life, because the brain is not doing something just for a very short period of time, not doing it correctly, something goes wrong. And my proposal is that we can track down. Now, if we focus just on this, we can track it down and find ways to, try to find ways to bring it back together.
Well, this has been amazing. Is there anybody online? I haven't seen anybody raise their hand online.
There were a couple comments in the chat.
Yeah, I think one of them is me asking people to raise. The other one is Anke thanking you for a great talk. So Anke Ehler is another world expert. We're meeting with her for lunch tomorrow. So
Yeah,
we'll
I'm
discuss
very
these
much
things.
looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, but I think this has been amazing. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
thank you.